Okay, so let's get right into it. If you rewind the clock all the way back, before there was life, there was just, well, a bunch of chemicals, a chaotic soup of molecules on a very young, very messy planet Earth. Making the jump from that primordial chaos to the very first living cell is probably one of the biggest leaps in the entire history of the universe. And a huge piece of that puzzle wasn't just about finding the right ingredients for life, but about building life its very first home. I mean, think about it, right? You can have all the perfect molecules for life floating around in the ocean, but without some kind of container, they're just going to drift apart. Life needed a room, a boundary, some kind of wall to concentrate all of its precious cargo and actually get some work done. So the question isn't just, how did life begin? It's also a construction problem. How on earth did life build its first house? For any of life's chemistry to really get going, it had to be separated from the great big world outside. There's a word for this: compartmentalization. It basically creates a little protected VIP lounge where important molecules, like, say, the earliest forms of genetic material, can build up to really high concentrations instead of just washing away. It's really the difference between a random pile of bricks and an actual house. Now, here's where we hit a snag. The membranes on our cells today, they are absolute masterpieces of engineering. They're complex, they're kind of fragile, and they need everything to be just right. But early Earth was the total opposite. It was harsh, it was chaotic, so life's first container couldn't be some delicate, complicated thing. No way. It had to be simple, it had to be tough, and it had to be able to build itself from whatever ingredients were just lying around.
So where could these simple, self-building parts have possibly come from? Well, this is where a really fascinating piece of research suggests we should look up. The recipe for life's first home might have literally fallen from the sky, delivered special delivery by meteorites.
The star ingredient in this cosmic recipe is a class of molecules called alpha-hydroxy acids. Let's just call them aHAs to keep it simple. These things are incredibly basic organic molecules. And what makes them so compelling is that we know they were on the early Earth. We've made them in labs that mimic primordial conditions, and, this is the kicker, we've actually found them inside of meteorites.
And listen, this isn't just some wild guess. Scientists have taken meteorites that have landed here on Earth, like the really famous Murchison meteorite that fell back in 1969, and they found these exact alpha-hydroxy acids inside. They were confirmed extraterrestrial ingredient, ready and waiting for the young Earth to use. Okay, so we have our ingredients delivered fresh from space. What's next? This is where the story gets really, really elegant. Researchers figured out that to turn these simple little molecules into complex structures, all you have to do is add water, and then take it away again.
The recipe is almost laughably simple, which honestly is exactly what you'd want for the origin of life. It goes like this. You take these alpha-hydroxy acids, you dissolve them in water, picture, a small pond or a puddle on the early Earth. Then you just gently warm it up and let the water evaporate, just like the sun would do every single day. This drying process links the molecules together into these long chains, and it forms a kind of gel. And finally, you just add water back. Maybe it rains, and you give it a little shake from some waves, and something amazing happens. This is what you get. The solution just instantly fills up with these beautiful, perfect little microscopic droplets. They are perfectly spherical, they're stable, and they're little compartments that assemble all by themselves. No complicated biology needed, just simple chemistry and physics doing their thing. And that's the beautiful part, right? This whole process is driven by simple things that happened all the time. The wetting and drying of a shoreline, a geothermal pool evaporating and then filling back up. These were just everyday events on the primordial planet. This process for making these little homes would have been happening all over the place, all the time. And believe it or not, it gets even cooler. These aren't just simple, empty little bubbles. What researchers discovered is that if they started with different kinds of alpha-hydroxy acids, they could create droplets with totally unique properties. Or, as a scientist might say, different phenotypes. Basically, they could make droplets with different talents. First off, they are surprisingly tough. You can dilute them, you can heat them up to near boiling temperatures, and they just hold together. Second, they're dynamic. They can bump into each other and merge to share what's inside, and then get broken apart again by a little bit of shaking, sort of like a primitive form of division. But this third talent, this is the real game changer. They are highly selective about what they let inside their walls. So to test this, the scientists used some fluorescent dyes. First up was a baseline test. They added a dye that's hydrophobic.
which is just a fancy way of saying it doesn't like water. And as you can see here, it lit up all the different kinds of droplets. So that tells us that the inside of these droplets is a cozy, water-free place for certain molecules to hang out. But then they tried it with one of the most important molecules for the origin of life, RNA. And the result was absolutely incredible. The RNA, which they tagged with a dye, completely ignored most of the droplets, but it flooded into one specific type, just one. This is selectivity in action. This one particular type of droplet created the perfect little haven to concentrate the building blocks of genetics. The researchers then went a step further and measured how tightly the droplets were holding on to these different molecules. And as this table shows, they found some were leaky. They allowed stuff to move in and out pretty fast. But others were sticky. They held onto their cargo for much, much longer. So not only can they select what comes inside, they can also control for how long it gets to stay. And here is the big aha moment. From just a simple mix of ingredients from a meteorite, you get this whole population of droplets with diverse chemical personalities, and it all happens spontaneously. One droplet might be great for collecting RNA. Another one might be the perfect spot for a totally different chemical reaction. All of a sudden, you've got an entire ecosystem of tiny, specialized chemical laboratories. So what does all this mean for the grand story of how life got started? Well, it suggests a brand new way to think about how chemical evolution could have really gotten off the ground long before the first true cell ever came to be. Here's why this is such a big deal. These droplets, they were shown to be totally compatible with both RNA and proteins, which means they could have hosted the real star players of early life. They can even act as a kind of scaffold for fatty acids, lipids, to organize around them, which hints at a possible bridge to the kind of membranes our own cells use today. But maybe most importantly, they create that diverse ecosystem of competing protocells, which gives natural selection something to actually work with for the very first time. The researchers who did this work, they put it perfectly in their paper. They said that these complex, lifelike behaviors can emerge simply from the unguided complexification of simple monomer types. In other words, you don't need some miracle to get this going. You just need simple ingredients and the basic laws of physics, and complexity will naturally bubble up on its own. So, you see, this completely flips the script. The beginning of life might not have been the miraculous appearance of a single, perfect protocell. Instead, it might have been a messy, bustling, competitive world, like a marketplace with millions of these simple droplets, each with different abilities, all competing with each other to host the chemical reactions that would, eventually, become life. And that leaves us with this one last, really fascinating thought. Maybe the origin of life wasn't about a single ancestor at all, but about an entire community, a diverse, evolving ecosystem of simple chemical droplets, born from meteorite dust and the daily cycles of a young planet, that together, somehow, stumbled their way towards that first incredible spark of life.